If you're enjoying this story, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more tales from the Old West. Your support helps us bring you these stories every week. The merciless Arizona sun beat down on the dusty trail that wound through the scorched landscape like a brown snake. Heat waves shimmered above the cracked earth, distorting the horizon where jagged mountains met the bleached sky. The air was so thick and dry, it seemed to burn the lungs with each breath. Sarah Mitchell stumbled along the rutted path, her worn black dress clinging to her thin frame with perspiration. The fabric, once fine wool, now hung loose and faded from months of hardship. Her bonnet, torn at the edges, provided little protection from the relentless sun that had already burned her pale skin. Each step sent small clouds of dust swirling around her ankles. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, her throat parched beyond relief. The small water skin she carried had been empty since dawn, and the sun now stood high overhead, a merciless white disk in the cloudless expanse above. Behind her lay the abandoned homestead, where she and her husband had tried to build a life. The bank had taken everything after Thomas died of fever last spring. Now she walked toward an uncertain future, carrying only what few possessions fit in her small carpet bag. The heat pressed down like a heavy blanket, making her head swim. Sweat stung her eyes as she squinted ahead, searching for any sign of shade or shelter. The landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, broken only by scattered Joshua trees and thorny scrub brush. Her legs trembled with exhaustion and dehydration. The weight of grief and desperation seemed to grow heavier with each labored step. She had been walking since before sunrise, hoping to reach the town of Copper Creek before the heat became unbearable. But the town seemed no closer than when she had started. The shimmering heat made distances impossible to judge. What looked like buildings in the distance proved to be nothing more than rock formations or stands of desert vegetation when she drew near. Sarah's vision began to blur. Dark spots danced at the edges of her sight, and her knees buckled slightly. She paused, swaying on the dusty trail, and pressed a trembling hand to her forehead. The skin felt burning hot beneath her palm. A buzzard circled overhead, its wings catching the thermals that rose from the superheated earth. The bird's harsh cry echoed across the empty landscape, a sound that seemed to mock her struggling efforts to continue. She took another step, then another, but her legs felt like water. The carpet bag slipped from her numb fingers and hit the ground with a soft thud, sending up a small puff of dust. She stared at it for a moment, unable to comprehend what had happened. The world tilted sideways. Sarah's vision tunneled to a small point of light, and she felt herself falling. The last thing she remembered was the taste of dust in her mouth and the sound of her body hitting the hard-packed earth. Miles away, Jacob Harrison guided his horse along the same trail. The tall, weathered rancher had been riding since before dawn, checking on his scattered cattle. His wide-brimmed hat cast a shadow over his sun-darkened face, and his blue eyes scanned the horizon with the practiced gaze of a man who had spent 30 years in this harsh country. His horse, a sturdy bay mare named Patience, picked her way carefully along the rocky path. The animal's coat was dark with sweat, but she moved with the steady endurance of a horse bred for desert work. Jacob carried 2 full canteens, knowing better than to venture into this wilderness without adequate water. The ranch lay behind him, a modest spread with a small house, barn, and corrals. It wasn't much, but it was his. He had built it with his own hands after coming west as a young man, full of dreams and determination. Those dreams had dimmed over the years, worn down by drought, harsh winters, and the endless struggle to make a living from the unforgiving land. He had never married, though not for lack of opportunity. The frontier was hard on women, and he had seen too many good men lose their wives to childbirth, disease, or simple exhaustion. He told himself he was better off alone, but the silence of his empty house sometimes felt heavier than the desert heat. As he rode, Jacob's attention was caught by something dark lying on the trail ahead. At first, he thought it might be a dead animal, but as he drew closer, he realized it was a person. His heart quickened, and he urged patience into a faster pace. The figure was a woman, lying motionless in the dust. Her black dress and bonnet suggested she was in mourning, and her pale skin was already beginning to redden from sun exposure. A small carpet bag lay nearby, its contents scattered by the desert wind. Jacob dismounted quickly and knelt beside her. She was breathing, but her pulse was weak and rapid. Her skin felt burning hot to the touch, and her lips were cracked and bleeding. He had seen heat exhaustion before and knew she was in serious danger. Working quickly, he lifted her into the shade of a nearby boulder. Her body was alarmingly light, as if she hadn't eaten properly in weeks. He wet his bandana with water from his canteen and gently bathed her face and neck, trying to cool her overheated skin. After a few minutes, the woman's eyelids fluttered open. Her eyes were a deep brown, like rich earth after rain, but they were clouded with confusion and pain. She tried to speak, but only a hoarse whisper emerged from her parched throat. Jacob held his canteen to her lips. The water was warm from the heat, but it was wet, and she drank eagerly, too eagerly. He pulled the canteen away when she began to choke, then allowed her to drink again more slowly. Gradually, some color returned to her cheeks. She struggled to sit up, but Jacob gently restrained her with a hand on her shoulder. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, and he could see the angry red of sunburn on her exposed skin. When she finally found her voice, it was barely above a whisper. She told him her name was Sarah Mitchell and that she was traveling to Copper Creek to look for work. Her husband had died, she said, and she had lost their homestead. She spoke in short, halting sentences, as if each word cost her great effort. Jacob studied her face as she spoke. Despite her obvious suffering, there was a quiet dignity about her, a strength that hadn't been broken by hardship. Her hands, though soft, showed the calluses of someone who wasn't afraid of hard work. He helped her gather her scattered belongings and assisted her to her feet. She swayed slightly, still weak from her ordeal, and he steadied her with a firm hand on her elbow. Her skin felt cold now, a sign that her body was still recovering from the heat. The sun was climbing higher, and Jacob knew they needed to get out of the open. Copper Creek was still hours away, but his ranch was much closer. He made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Sarah was too weak to protest when he helped her onto his horse. She sat side-saddle, her carpet bag secured behind the saddle, while Jacob walked alongside, leading Patience by the reins. The desert heat continued to beat down on them, but at least she was no longer walking in it. The journey to the ranch took 2 hours. Sarah dozed fitfully in the saddle, her body swaying with the horse's movement. Jacob kept one hand on the reins and the other ready to steady her if she began to fall. The sun seemed to grow hotter as they traveled, and he was grateful for the shade his hat provided. When they finally crested the low hill that overlooked his property, Sarah roused herself enough to look around. The ranch wasn't much to look at, but after the endless desert it seemed like an oasis. A windmill turned lazily in the hot breeze, drawing water from a deep well. A few cattle grazed in a fenced pasture, and chickens pecked in the dust near the barn. The house was small but sturdy, built of adobe with a red tile roof. A covered porch ran along the front, providing precious shade. It wasn't grand, but it looked solid and permanent, a welcome sight after the uncertainty of the trail. Jacob helped Sarah down from the horse and guided her to the porch. She sank gratefully into an old wooden chair, her head spinning from the heat and exhaustion. He brought her more water and a damp cloth to cool her face, then disappeared into the house. The interior was sparse but clean. A main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. Simple wooden furniture was arranged around the room, and colorful blankets hung from the walls. It was clearly the home of a bachelor, but it was comfortable and well-maintained. Jacob returned with a bowl of cool water and clean cloths. Without asking permission, he began cleaning the dust and dirt from Sarah's face and hands. His touch was gentle but confident, and she found herself relaxing under his care. It had been so long since anyone had shown her such kindness. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah's strength gradually returned. Jacob prepared a simple meal of beans and cornbread, apologizing for the plain fare. She ate slowly, her stomach unaccustomed to food after days of poor meals and little rest. The simple meal tasted better than anything she had eaten in months. They spoke little during the meal, but there was a comfortable quiet between them. Jacob was not a man of many words, but his actions spoke of a basic decency that had become rare in her experience. He asked no questions about her circumstances, made no demands, and expected nothing in return for his help. As evening approached, the desert heat began to fade. A gentle breeze stirred the air, bringing with it the scent of sage and distant rain. Sarah sat on the porch, watching the sky turn from white to gold to deep purple. Stars began to appear, brilliant in the clear air. Jacob emerged from the house, carrying a cup of coffee and a blanket. He handed her the coffee, then draped the blanket around her shoulders. The desert could be cold at night, he explained, and she would need warmth once the sun disappeared completely. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one. Sarah couldn't remember the last time she had felt so peaceful. The trauma of losing her husband, her home, and her security had left her feeling like a leaf blown by the wind. But here, in this quiet place, she felt anchored for the first time in months. Jacob broke the silence to ask about her plans. She admitted she had no real plan beyond reaching Copper Creek and hoping to find work. She had no family, no friends, and very little money. The honest desperation in her voice moved him more than tears would have. He made an offer that surprised them both. He needed help around the ranch, he said. The house needed a woman's touch, and he was tired of his own poor cooking. If she was willing to work, he could provide room and board, and a small wage besides. It wouldn't be easy, but it would be honest work, and she would be safe. Sarah stared at him in the starlight, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. After months of uncertainty and fear, here was stability being offered by a virtual stranger. But as she looked at his weathered face and kind eyes, she realized he wasn't really a stranger. Some people, she had learned, revealed their character not through words, but through actions. The next morning, Sarah woke in the small bedroom Jacob had given her. It was the first time in weeks she had slept in a real bed, and she felt more rested than she had in months. Sunlight streamed through the small window, and she could hear the sounds of morning activity from the barnyard. She dressed quickly and made her way to the kitchen, where Jacob was already preparing breakfast. He looked up as she entered, and she saw something in his eyes that made her heart skip. It was more than kindness, more than mere concern for her welfare. But neither of them spoke of it. The days that followed fell into a comfortable routine. Sarah threw herself into the work of maintaining the household. She cooked, cleaned, mended clothes, and tended a small vegetable garden behind the house. The work was hard, but it was satisfying in a way that her previous life had never been. Jacob worked from dawn to dusk, tending his cattle and maintaining the ranch. He was gone most days, riding the range to check on his herd, but he always returned by evening. Sarah found herself looking forward to his return, listening for the sound of his horse's hooves on the dusty trail. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and talk. Jacob was a good listener, and Sarah found herself telling him about her life before coming to the desert. She spoke of her childhood in Missouri, her marriage to Thomas, and their dreams of building a life in the West. The dreams had died with Thomas, but talking about them helped ease the pain of loss. Jacob, in turn, shared stories of his own past. He had come west as a young man, full of ambition and hope. He had worked for other ranchers, saved his money, and eventually bought this piece of land. It had been a struggle, but he had built something lasting with his own hands. As the weeks passed, Sarah began to notice changes in herself. The constant fear and anxiety that had plagued her since Thomas's death began to fade. She slept better, ate with appetite, and found herself laughing at Jacob's dry humor. The desert, which had seemed so hostile and threatening, began to feel like home. The work was demanding, but Sarah found satisfaction in it. She had always been capable, but marriage to Thomas had given her few opportunities to prove her independence. Now, managing the household and contributing to the ranch's operation, she discovered strengths she hadn't known she possessed. Jacob, too, was changing. The loneliness that had been his constant companion for so many years began to lift. The house felt alive now, filled with the sounds and smells of Sarah's presence. He found himself working closer to home, inventing tasks that would bring him back to the ranch by midday. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of red and gold, Sarah spoke the words that had been building in her heart for weeks. She thanked Jacob for saving her life, not just from the desert heat, but from the despair that had been consuming her. She had been lost, she said, but he had given her purpose and hope. Jacob's response was characteristically quiet. He told her that she had saved him too, in ways she might not understand. The loneliness of his bachelor existence had been wearing him down, he admitted. Her presence had brought warmth and meaning to his life that he had never thought possible. The conversation that followed was tentative, filled with long pauses and careful words. Both had been hurt by loss, and neither wanted to rush into something that might bring more pain. But the attraction between them was undeniable, growing stronger with each passing day. Sarah had been a widow for less than a year, and she still felt the weight of mourning. Thomas had been a good man, and she had loved him in her own way. But what she felt for Jacob was different, deeper somehow. It was based not on youthful passion, but on mutual respect and shared hardship. Jacob had never been married, but he had loved before. A woman in town had caught his eye years ago, but she had chosen someone else, someone who could offer her a life of comfort and security. The rejection had taught him to be cautious with his heart, but Sarah's presence was breaking down the walls he had built around his emotions. As autumn approached, bringing cooler temperatures and the promise of relief from the summer heat, their relationship deepened. They worked together with the easy familiarity of a married couple, anticipating each other's needs and preferences. The physical attraction was there, simmering beneath the surface, but neither acted on it. One evening, as they prepared for the approaching winter, Jacob made a confession that changed everything. He told Sarah that he had been married once before, briefly, to a woman who had died in childbirth, along with their baby. The pain of that loss had convinced him that he was meant to live alone, that caring for someone only led to heartbreak. Sarah's response was immediate and heartfelt. She took his hands in hers and told him that love always carried the risk of loss, but that didn't make it less worthwhile. She had lost Thomas, but she didn't regret the years they had shared. The pain of loss was the price of having loved deeply. That night, for the first time since she had arrived at the ranch, Sarah didn't sleep alone. They came together with the desperate passion of two people who had found something precious and feared losing it. Their lovemaking was tender and urgent, a celebration of life in the face of all the losses they had endured. The next morning brought no awkwardness or regret. They worked together as they always had, but now there was a new intimacy between them. Small touches, shared glances, and quiet conversations revealed the depth of their growing bond. Jacob began to speak of the future in a way he never had before. He talked about expanding the ranch, maybe buying more cattle, perhaps even building a larger house. Sarah listened with growing excitement, realizing that he was including her in these plans, that he saw her as a permanent part of his life. The proposal, when it came, was as simple and direct as the man himself. They were sitting on the porch one evening, watching the stars emerge in the clear desert sky. Jacob turned to her and said that he had been thinking about what would make him happiest, and the answer was spending the rest of his life with her. Sarah's answer was equally simple. She had been thinking the same thing, she told him. She had come to the desert with nothing, fleeing from a life that had fallen apart, but she had found something here that she had never expected to find again. Love, purpose, and the promise of a future filled with hope. The wedding was small, held in the little church in Copper Creek with only a few neighbors as witnesses. Sarah wore a simple blue dress that Jacob had bought for her in town, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers that grew near the ranch. It wasn't a grand affair, but it was perfect in its simplicity. As winter settled over the desert, Sarah and Jacob began their new life together. The harsh landscape that had nearly claimed her life now provided the backdrop for their happiness. They worked together to prepare for the cold months ahead, stocking supplies and ensuring their cattle had adequate shelter. The house that had seemed so empty to Jacob now rang with laughter and conversation. Sarah's presence had transformed it from a mere shelter into a true home. She hung curtains at the windows, planted flowers in the yard, and filled the rooms with the warmth of her personality. Their love story had begun with a moment of crisis in the desert heat, but it had grown into something solid and enduring. They had both learned that sometimes the greatest treasures are found in the most unlikely places, and that love can bloom even in the harshest conditions. As the story of their meeting spread through the small community, it became a tale of hope and redemption. People spoke of the widow who had collapsed in the desert, and the bachelor rancher who had rescued her, not just from the heat, but from despair itself. It was a reminder that even in the harsh frontier, human kindness could triumph over adversity. Years later, when Sarah looked back on that day, when she had fallen unconscious on the desert trail, she realized it had been the moment her real life began. The suffering and loss that had brought her to that point had been necessary, preparing her for the love and happiness that awaited her at Jacob's ranch. The desert had tested them both, stripping away everything non-essential and revealing the core of who they really were. In that harsh crucible, they had found not just survival, but a love that would endure through all the challenges that lay ahead. Their story became a testament to the power of human resilience and the unexpected ways that fate can intervene to bring two souls together. The seasons turned, bringing new challenges and deeper bonds. Spring arrived with unexpected rains that transformed the desert into a carpet of wildflowers. Sarah had never seen anything so beautiful, and she spent hours walking among the blooms with Jacob, marveling at how life could emerge from such harsh conditions. Their first year of marriage brought its share of difficulties. A drought threatened the cattle, and they worked together to dig new wells and move the herd to better grazing. Sarah proved herself capable of ranch work, learning to ride and help with the cattle when needed. The loneliness that had once defined their lives became a distant memory. They had found in each other not just love, but partnership and purpose. When neighbors needed help, they worked together. When illness struck the community, Sarah tended the sick while Jacob provided supplies and support. Their story became legend in the small frontier community. People would point to them as proof that love could conquer even the harshest circumstances. Children grew up hearing the tale of the widow who collapsed in the desert and the bachelor who saved her, not knowing that their love story was still being written. As Sarah stood in her garden one evening, watching Jacob return from the range, she reflected on the journey that had brought them together. The desert heat that had nearly killed her had also delivered her to the greatest happiness of her life. Sometimes she realized you had to lose everything to find what you were truly meant to have. The sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant colors. In the distance, she could hear the lowing of cattle and the whisper of wind through the desert plants. This harsh land had become home, and the man riding toward her had become her heart's true companion. Jacob dismounted and walked to where she stood among the vegetables and flowers. Without words, he took her hand, and they stood together, watching the stars emerge in the vast desert sky. They had found their place in the world, and more importantly, they had found each other. The future stretched before them, full of promise and possibility. They spoke of children, of expanding the ranch, of growing old together in this place they had made their own. The desert had tested them and found them worthy of the love they had discovered. Their story would be told for generations, a testament to the power of compassion and the unexpected ways that fate can intervene to bring two lonely souls together. In a land where survival was never guaranteed, they had found something more precious than gold or water. They had found each other. What do you think was the most important moment in Sarah and Jacob's love story? Was it when he first found her in the desert, or when they finally opened their hearts to each other?